Connective tissue is the most abundant and widely distributed tissue in the body. It's made up of cells and an extracellular matrix. The matrix is very abundant with just a few cells and a lot of stuff between the cells that we call matrix that keep those cells within the tissue from touching each other. The matrix of connective tissue may be fluid or semi-fluid or gelatin-like. It may be fibrous or calcified. It's usually secreted by the connective tissue cells and adjacent cells, and of course that determines what the tissue qualities are. Though connective tissues don't have any free surfaces, remember when we looked at epithelial tissues, we had the cells attached to a basement membrane and they had a free or apical surfaces. Your connective tissues are not like that, so they don't form linings and covers. Instead, they connect one thing to another, or they're found between other types of tissues. Also, unlike epithelial tissues, your connective tissue is usually very highly vascularized except for cartilage and tendons, so structures that we'll look at that are associated with bones and muscles and joints. And also connective tissue, unlike epithelial tissues, have a nerve supply except for the cartilage connective tissue, which we'll examine on the next video. So let's look briefly at some of the cells found within connective tissue. First of all, these cells are derived from a common embryonic tissue known as mesenchyme. Immature cells have names that end in blast, for instance, fibroblast and chondroblast and osteoblast, while mature cells have names that end in cyte, for example, chondrocyte, osteocyte. Now, it's important to bring up here how we're going to use terminology throughout your study of A&P. A lot of times you'll see very similar suffixes and prefixes used over and over again. So anytime you hear osteo or oste, you think bone. So osteoblast is an immature bone cell that's going to help to create bone. An osteocyte is a mature bone cell that just helps to maintain that tissue. Chondri means cartilage, so a chondrocyte is a mature cartilage cell. Alright, so most of these cells have a reduced capacity for cell division and matrix formation, and they're pretty much just involved in maintaining the matrix. So we'll look at a few of these, and then we'll look at the matrix itself. So the fibroblasts are going to secrete fibers and matrix. So they're large flat cells that move throughout the connective tissue and secrete those fibers, long stringy things that you can see, some of them here, and then some of these yellow ones and the lighter ones as well. We'll talk about those fibers. You have macrophages. Macro always means large. Phage means to eat. So macrophages are going to be some of your white blood cells, and their job is to go throughout tissues and to eat and digest away cellular debris and destroy bacteria. Plasma cells are also going to be some of your immune system cells. They're going to secrete proteins called antibodies, and that helps to mark tissues for destruction. Mast cells are very abundant along blood vessels, and they're going to be a part of the immune response. They secrete histamine, which causes blood vessels to dilate. And of course, when blood vessels dilate, then more and more blood cells, including your white blood cells, can get out into those tissues. Adipocytes are fat cells. So remember, cyte means cell. Adipose is fat tissue. So your adipose cells store energy in the form of fat. They're found abundantly around some of your organs, and they give us sort of a storage for energy. Your leukocytes, there are many different types. We talked about the macrophages and the mast cells and the plasma cells. Additional leukocytes include your eosinophils, which are white blood cells that come into an area when you have a parasitic infection or in the process of an allergic response, and they secrete chemicals that help to digest things away, and they can also become phagocytic or eat away cellular debris and bacteria. Your neutrophils are white blood cells that migrate to the sites, and again, they're going to destroy microbes such as bacteria by phagocytosis. Phagocytosis, that's eating things that shouldn't be there. So when you have an infection in a particular tissue, these white blood cell numbers are going to increase. All right, so that gives you a basic overview of the cell types in there. Now let's look at the connective tissue extracellular matrix. So the extracellular matrix is what is located between the cells of the connective tissues. Okay, so here we see some of the cells that we just talked about, and then you see these stringy little things. Those are going to be fibers. All the background stuff is extracellular matrix, which includes the ground substance, the sort of jelly type stuff, I guess you could say, and all of those fibers. So extracellular matrix, again, is composed of the fibers and the ground substance. If any of you have ever had like a Jell-O salad, my granny used to make it every Christmas, and she would take marshmallows and pecans and maybe some sliced apples or something, and she'd chop them up and put them into her Jell-O, and then when it congealed, you'd have all of this fruits and nuts suspended in that Jell-O. So the fruits and nuts and things would be sort of like the cells in connective tissue, and the Jell-O itself would be the ground substance, or what is holding them all together. So the function of the ground matrix is that it supports and bonds and provides sort of a medium for the exchange of material between the blood and the cells. And of course the composition of that ground matrix and the cells found within are going to help determine that particular tissue's function. The fibers found in the extracellular matrix provide strength and support to a tissue. So the fibers are typically going to be one of three types, and you may find all three types within a particular type of connective tissue. Your collagen fibers are going to be composed of the protein collagen. They're very tough and resilient to stretching, but they allow for some flexibility in the tissue. So we find a lot of collagen fibers in bone, cartilage, tendons, and ligaments. Your elastic tissues function very much like elastic in your clothing. So it allows for stretch and the capacity to recoil and come back into shape. So they're composed of the protein known as elastin, allow for stretching and strength. So you find a lot of elastic fibers in tissues that are going to be stretched and have to go back into shape, such as your skin, your blood vessels, and your lungs. And then the last of these that we'll look at are the reticular fibers, which are made of collagen with a glycoprotein. So a glycoprotein is a protein that has sugar attached. So your reticulars are made up of collagen and glycoprotein. They support the walls of blood vessels and form a really strong supporting network around fat cells and nerve fibers, and skeletal and smooth muscle fibers. So when you hear reticular, you usually think of a network. When we classify connective tissues, we have to understand that each one of these, of course, is made up of different cell types and a different extracellular matrix. Mature connective tissue exists in a newborn, and it has differentiated cells. Differentiated, again, means specialized cells, but they all derive from that mesenchyme, which is the embryonic tissue. Those tissues don't change types after birth. We subdivide them into several different kinds, so connective tissue proper, cartilage, bone, and blood. But then we can also subtype them or classify them further into loose connective tissue, dense connective tissue, cartilage, bone, and blood.